My name is Eva, and for 3.5 years now, I already live in Nepal. And in the last couple of months, Nepal has experienced a fuel crisis, which has its roots in a border blockade in the border with India. Nepal is a landlocked country between China and India, and the Chinese border is very long but not very accessible. There's only one road, but that has been destroyed in the April 2015 earthquake, so it's not possible to go to China. And in the winter, it's not possible anyways because it crosses the Himalaya. So the only roads that come into the country come from the Indian side. And in Nepal, up until 2006, there was a civil war. Between different groups that were fighting about mainly minority rights and power distribution and things like that. And after they finished the war, they had a peace agreement and an interim constitution. And this interim constitution was supposed to be signed into law since 2006, but politicians failed over and over, and it never really worked out, mainly because they couldn't even determine the form of state they wanted and the borders of districts, because right now Nepal has more than 50 districts, and they wanted to bring it down to 5, or now they say 7, but it's very difficult because it's some people wanted to draw the borders depending on ethnicities living in the area. Some people wanted to draw them for geographical reasons, and it's a big discussion since 2006. And in the aftermath of the earthquake, for some reason, the politicians thought it was a great idea to, after failing for 8 years, to do it quickly after the earthquake. And they made a constitution, and they very quickly signed it into law with a very, very short period of consultation with the public. So it was already done by the time that the constitution came to some villages in the mountains for public consultation. But by that time, it was already signed into law. So it was ridiculous, and everybody was there was a lot of protests in Kathmandu because, especially for minority rights and for women's rights, this constitution is not ideal. And I was personally shocked that in the year 2015 you can sign a piece of paper like that is so backwards, where Nepal already had a very good constitution. This interim constitution had many of the provisions that they're fighting about now, but they took them out again because traditionally the politicians in Nepal, they are upper caste people who have been politicians since generations. And of course, or maybe of course is the wrong word, but I use of course, they have no interest in giving minorities their rights. So they're not really interested in a true democracy. And many of those minorities, especially in the south, they are called the Madhesis, have Indian roots and they have very close connections to India. So of course India also got involved in this because they wanted rights for they're not really Indian citizens, but they are closely tied. So they feel like maybe they're Indian citizens. And the Nepali politicians and the Kathmandu upper class, they sometimes fear Indian involvement. So the root of all these provisions in the constitution were in the south because, to put it in very simple words, the Kathmandu elite wanted to keep the Indians out and the Indians wanted in. So that was the conflict. And after they announced the constitution, India did some very stupid diplomatic moves, like just recognizing the constitution instead of welcoming it. And then they sent their ambassador one day before the vote to say that we have to change that. And then, of course, the Nepali, everybody got very irritated because Nepal is a sovereign country and not a state of India. And India tends to do that, as we all know. If we look at some countries that have been countries and now are not countries anymore, like Sikkim or other parts where India just kind of took over. So there was a lot of fear that India would try to do that, and the nationalism grew very strong. And Nepal just ignored these comments. And as a reaction to that, at some point, after some weeks and after it just escalated, India closed the border. And it was an unofficial blockade, so there was never an official statement saying we will not let anybody cross. But in practice, it was the fact that no truck, no vehicle could cross the border. and that was in September 2015. And the most important thing that comes from India is fuel. So cooking gas, but mostly petrol. So very quickly, Kathmandu ran out of petrol. So the cars could not go anymore, buses could not go anymore. After the 2 months, schools started closing because they couldn't cook for their children. They didn't have petrol for their school buses anymore. Ambulance, then they had to ration it so that only ambulances got petrol, and only the important vehicles like school buses or some buses got petrol. And taxi drivers, they were lining up sometimes for 3, 4, 5 days, sleeping in their vehicles just to get 5 liters of petrol. So the prices went through the roof as well. Everything got more expensive, also food, because Nepal also depends on India for rice, because they don't produce enough rice anymore. So it got very critical. And on the south, by the border, but also in other villages, the conflicts were very difficult. Of course, people tried to open the blockade. And there were riots and people died. And then in the very beginning of this, at some point, many policemen died in one incident. So 8 policemen died. And of course, if members of the force die, I think they always get more aggressive in the aftermath. So then they wouldn't wait anymore and try to calm people down, but started shooting very early. So many people died, and it was very tense. And I think it was, it's too simple to say it's India's fault. It's the same Nepal's fault, because they never got back to the table. They never tried to figure things out. And as I said, this constitution in itself is embarrassing for the year 2015. I would say that's my personal opinion. But of course, that's also not the solution to just close the border and in reality hurt the people who are also poor, because the people who were mostly affected were people who had already lost their house in the earthquake, because the rebuilding process was stalled because there was no materials, but also because the politicians were so busy trying to figure out this problem that no one thought about signing the Reconstruction Authority into law, or making a building code or anything. So nothing happened on the reconstruction side. And the people who suffered were the people who were already hit by the earthquake and who were already poor. And the politicians and the upper caste people in Kathmandu, of course, they didn't suffer. They don't care. They have the money to buy whatever they need on the black market. And that's what happened. After 2 or 3 months, the black market became rampant. It was crazy. The price of fuel went up from 100, 120 before the crisis to more than 500 per liter. So it was a luxury to go by bus or by car. But that was black market prices. There was almost nothing in the petrol stations anymore, but everything came to the black market. So the price went down a little bit, but it was still the same. And then typical Nepali thing, what happened is that the authorities took over the black market to benefit from this. So in the end, the people who were supposed to get hurt or to get to get how do you say that in English, to start thinking, were the people who benefited most, because they took over the black market and made a fortune. And now in February 2016, I've read that last week the blockade has been opened because of this black market. The public acceptation went down drastically, because in the beginning everybody had some understanding for the mission of the Madasi people, because, as I said, there is reason to protest this constitution. Maybe not with these means, but there is reason for protest. But once the black market was so dominant and it was just getting difficult for everybody, and nobody seemed to try to resolve anything of this on the political side, but it was just about money, acceptance went down. And I've read now that last week the first vehicles have crossed the border again, and also the first fuel vehicles came over again. But of course, it will take months to go back to normal. And result is the economic loss due to this crisis is already bigger, was in October. So that's like 4 months ago, was already bigger than the economic loss from the earthquake. And that's crazy, because in the earthquake, almost 10,000 people died. So And also, I'm sure that many of the people who died this year in the mountains from the cold died because they didn't get their relief materials, because there was no petrol to put in the trucks, and there was no corrugated iron, because that's coming from India as well. So this had huge effects on the lives of everybody, and I think it will take years and years for Nepal to recover from this on the in the economy, but of course also in the relationship of trust with their neighbor, because they depend on everything on India, and now they don't trust each other a centimeter anymore. So I think this will have effects that determine the future of both of the countries for a long time.